everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is former governor and RNC chair Marc, who is now the chair of our Republican legacy. Governor, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to speak with you today. So first of all, a big congratulations on the new position. You are now serving as chair of our Republican legacy. So to start off the conversation, can you talk to us about what exactly the organization does? Because it has been described as the shadow RNC.
Yeah, that's a bit ominous in my judgment. It is a very forthright and completely open, transparent attempt to try and bring back into our considerations in the political world traditional Republican principles, things like respect for the rule of law and promoting responsibility through budgeting and every other part of the law, using upon those typical things that were a part of the Republican Party when I first became a member and have since vanished over the course of the last few years.
I want to rattle off some positions you've held. I want to rattle off some of your resume here. You've served as the RNC chair. You've served as Montana's attorney general and governor, and you managed President Bush's re-election campaign in 2004. So you were a big part of the Republican Party 2 decades ago. Talk to us about the trajectory and where you've seen it really change and develop in the past 20 years.
Well, interestingly, sometimes to the surprise of many, I was not involved in partisan politics early on in my career. Started out in the Army, obviously not much to do with politics in the Army, and I was a prosecutor, and I worked with law enforcement for a very long time, and then ran for Attorney General in 1988, and at that time, it was incumbent upon me to make a choice about where I sat on the political spectrum. I had a mother who was a good Republican and a father who was a good Democrat. So it was a mixed marriage and an open decision for me. And I decided, although I wasn't enraptured with either party, to be honest, I found myself more comfortable as a Republican and what they stood for at the time. And of course, when I got to know then Governor George Bush in the 90s, we became very good friends. And compassionate conservatism wasn't the slogan for George Bush. It was a political philosophy, trying to bring about, conservative notions and thoughts that are reasonable and in the best interest of people, while at the same time bringing some compassion and concern for the people that we lived with. So that's the way he governed, not without mistakes, any of us in that process. But at the end of the day, it was a thoughtful, reasonable, predictable Republican Party that was focused upon serving the appropriate function to offer candidates and ideas into the political marketplace, and then to try and distill them into sound policy. And, the hierarchy of values for me always was that my primary loyalty was to my country, to my nation, to my fellow citizens. And if it happened to coincide that impact concern merged with a Republican Party principle, that was a happy coincidence, and I was delighted it did. But at the same time, if I had to choose, as Winston Churchill pointed out, between my party and my country, I was going to choose my country. And I found the Republican Party wandering off into oblivion and into darkness. And about 2007 or so, maybe 8, during the campaign for president, with the infusion of the internet into the process, making it so brittle and so angry and so capable of distorting information, that was the moment where I saw the Republican Party take a steep right turn. And as a consequence, in 2016, I made it known and wrote about it that I was not going to support Donald Trump because I didn't think he had the character or the values to serve as president of the United States. So that's the journey, a long one.
I love it. And I think it's really striking that your parents had, I'm assuming, a successful marriage. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. I don't think you would see that much these days because people are so bitterly divided when it comes to politics. And it sounds like you want to get back to that compassionate conservatism. So do you see any Republican right now, a current lawmaker serving now in this country, that you would like to see as the standard bearer for the party? Or are you saying just mow it down and start anew?
Well, I don't think so. I think a lot of us are capable of rehabilitation and to refocus upon really what should drive us in our political affairs. But we live in a democracy, Brittany, that is dependent upon our consent, the consent of every citizen to agree. There's nothing that says that we have to be involved in a democracy. We choose it. Each one of us chooses it every day. And as a consequence, we have to have some concern for our fellow citizens. I mean, it's not just my way or the highway every day. It just simply doesn't work for a democracy to try to function like that. So respect for others, compassion, self-restraint, moderation, all of those virtues that were a part of the founders' belief being essential to the Constitution and ultimately to our democracy have dissipated in the Republican Party. So do I have friends and people that I have great confidence in the or did have at one point in time in the United States Senate or the House of Representatives? Yes, there are people that I campaigned for. I recruited to run for office, and I traveled around the country to support. But frankly, they've lost their way, and they I don't know whatever this adhesive is that holds all of these people that I knew as good, decent, thoughtful, capable, smart, so bound to Donald Trump. The only thing I can surmise is that they're worried about not getting reelected. And so as a consequence, they acquiesce. I think that's starting to change a little bit here and there. I know it is among the people across the country because they've kind of had it with this all or nothing philosophy and not trying to live in a way that allows for us in this free society to respect each other and to try to put policy forward that benefits all the people of the country. So, there's so many signs that there's so much wrong. We'll see what happens with the big, beautiful bill, which frankly is a kind of a childish title in the first place and reflects the approach I think that some on the other side of the river from me now think is cute, but it's it's a kind of a reflection of not treating the issue seriously, and it is going to decimate across the country. So they've lost their way, in my judgment. Can they make it back? Absolutely. Are they smart enough, bright enough, thoughtful enough? Yes, if they choose it, but they've got to have the courage to do it. They're not the only ones, Brittany, that are involved in this process where they've abandoned their reason for running, their reason to be elected, their reason to serve in a deliberative body. It's not impossible for them to rediscover what it was that urged them to run in the first place, and then to try and make a country that we all love even better than what it was.
How, if you think that some of these Republicans lost their way, how do you try to get them to find their way back to the Republican Party, to the pillars you hold dear, to being a Republican? Because as of now, because President Trump is the president of the United States, he's the leader of the Republican Party, he is the standard bearer of the GOP. What's your pitch then to those MAGA-aligned lawmakers and voters?
Well, I think it's very difficult to make the argument to our fellow citizens. With 350 million people are hard to turn around on a dime. I do think, however, that there is a great deal of dissent with what's going on presently, and it's building over the course of time, because their policies tearing apart the government, they're policies that are focused only upon our own isolated concerns and imperatives, the selfish interest of the party gathering control constantly and continually, wanting even more power and authority to drive only their imperatives to completion. All of those things are going to place the country in great peril. As a matter of fact, when you take a look across the landscape and you take a look at how they've disassembled all of the different functions of government at the federal level, how they're going to, with this big, beautiful bill, transfer huge responsibilities, fiscal responsibilities to the state, how that's almost a a sleight of hand effort to keep people distracted, that they're damaging the country in a great many ways. It's easy to tear something apart very quickly, especially governmental organizations. It takes a lifetime to put them back together. So look at tariffs, look at what's happening to agriculture, look at what's happening in our schools, our colleges, our universities. All the Pell Grant system, the student loan system, all of those things have been attacked and undermined. And there's no way that we can, without an educated populace, without an agricultural system that functions to supply us food, without tariffs that make sense so people can afford the goods they need, those things will come home to roost. I just hope that there's not so much damage by the time we get to that point that we can't recover in a period of time that serves the American people very well at all.
I want to pick your brain on some of those issues, but first, you've talked about your respect for democracy. Do you think President Trump and the MAGA movement share that respect? And critics of President Trump say that right now we're marching closer and closer, inching towards authoritarianism. Is that a concern you have?
There's no question in my mind that this is an autocracy in motion. It is happening right now. The assumption of responsibility for judicial decisions, the criticism that goes from the President of the United States, regardless of whether you like him or you don't, every president is in charge of a co-equal branch of government and defying court orders, castigating them with childish epithets, trying to find any way that they possibly can to get away with what it is that they think is important. They're tearing apart the separation of powers. That when it gets to the point where the orders of courts are uniformly defied or simply ignored by the executive branch of government, that's the day that democracy crumbles. That's the day where we have huge possibilities for disruption, civil disruption in the country, and where we start being, I think, out of frustration and out of a sense of desperation, simply cannot expect that this free society, this union that holds itself together by our consent and respect for each other, can last. So the answer to your question is there's no doubt in my mind about the assumption of authority of every other branch, and not just in federal government agency, but in the states as well. Look what happened in California. There's marching into town with troops with no notice to the governor, no coordination with the state commanded military force. These things are just, they mount up, and we're at a point of great peril.
I think immigration is a point where people have thought that President Trump and the Trump administration perhaps have lost the compassionate part of compassionate conservatism, because polling-wise, President Trump's handling of immigration continues to be a highlight for him, although the country's split. About half of the country, according to a recent poll, thinks President Trump's deportation policies go too far. And when there were protests in the LA area over workplace ICE raids, President Trump did send in the National Guard against Governor Gavin Newsom's wishes. As a conservative, as someone who is a Republican, how would you like President Trump to handle immigration? How would you grade his policies there?
Well, I would not claim that we have had a great deal of just dealing with immigration in this country. We in Montana share a 550-mile border with Canada, and frankly, it's probably a model of the kind of immigration issues that you can confront and deal with in a constructive fashion. We have this is a multi-party problem over the course of time. And there's unquestionably the capacity within thoughtful, reasonable people who are principled and conservative, as well as those on the other side of the spectrum, can't sit down and design a system that does not tear the country apart. Now, Trump's calling card is to appeal to grievance and resentment and to sloganeer his way through problems. If he's not profane, he'll pick a slogan. And as a consequence of that, he does appeal to a certain segment of the population. I don't think it's anywhere near a majority, that is concerned about immigration. But then when it starts to hit close to home, when people don't have things on their table that they're used to, that those who have come from another country are processing and providing to them, or when there are possibilities for the entertainment industry or the hotel industry or whatever it might be, where you cannot find labor, then you know that we've got an issue that we need to fix and we need to negotiate about. But screaming and yelling and castigating and dehumanizing people is not what a president of the United States ought to proceed with as his primary effort. What would happen if he sat down and said, you know, we have to fix this in a way that makes sense? And how about we begin from the beginning and then try to get to an appropriate end?
What do you think, in your opinion, is the way that makes sense? Because I think if anyone could answer that, that would be the winning answer, because immigration has been a top issue for years now. People really took issue to the way President Biden handled immigration, or his lack of a clear, consistent policy, a clear, consistent handling of the southern border. People think President Trump there's a dehumanization effort, there's a lack of due process. I mean, what do you think is the sweet spot to fix this situation?
Well, first of all, I think we have to start out recognizing that virtually every single one of us, but for our indigenous people, are immigrants, or the sons and daughters and grandchildren of immigrants. So the country was built upon people looking for a better life. And I think that's still a dream. But have we maintained the southern border with as much circumspection and as much focus as we should have over the course of the last 30 years? Probably no, is the answer to that. So how do we go about fixing it? I think what you do is you do have the ability to make inquiries about whether or not those who are coming are enabled or entitled to ultimately immigrate into our country. Do they benefit the country? Do they bring with them attributes and possibilities for dreams of their own that are constructive and helpful? We can do better at the border itself without, I think, being so forceful and so angry about what's going on. I'm talking about a change in tone and a change in effort and a bipartisan acceptance of responsibility for how we deal with this. I mean, if you can do it with tariffs, and that's really, he didn't do that. Frankly, it's such a mess now. God only knows what it is. But typically, tariffs are settled upon a bipartisan basis and with negotiations going back and forth. If you can do that with goods and services, why can't you do that with people?
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act is legislation that holds President Trump's immigration policies as well as his signature tax policies. He wants it on his desk by July 4th, and it narrowly eked through the House, and it's right now in front of the Senate. Democrats and Republicans agree, though, that there will be changes made. Some big points of contention here are the cuts to Medicaid, as well as the trillions it will add to the national deficit. I know you take issue with this bill's name, but what else do you think about it? What do you think about the meat inside of it?
Well, it's a sleight of hand, in my judgment, where you're taking allocated funds that have been previously allocated for things like Medicaid and educational expenses or investments that we made over the course of time, the SNAP program, the food assistance program, and you're skimming off the top of those programs so that you can reauthorize what you already have, which quite frankly was not near the tax relief that the president thinks it was. In most of my instances of understanding the tax situations of people, it did very, very little for the middle class in this country. So the notion that he's a champion of tax reform for the middle class is a fallacy. It's a pipe dream. It never came true. So we're going to reauthorize that now with another, $3.5 trillion over the course of the next decade. And that is nuts to me. And so in addition to that, what he's going to do is expand it even further by stealing away allocated funds from Medicaid, from education programs, from the Forest Service, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, everything that they can possibly take money from which was determined, by the way, not by people looking at it, but by feeding keywords into AI programs, and anything that got kicked out of the computer is something that was cut or done away with. So at the end of the day, they're not good managers. They don't manage people well. They don't manage finances well. They don't manage government well. This is all a process of them charging at lightning speed and to disassemble as much as they possibly can to gather the fruits of their disassembly and provide another tax reform bill over the next 10 years that's going to decimate the states. And it's going to be a cruel impact upon the people that you and I live with. So that's what I think of it. And why don't our great titans of industry who know this to be true, why don't they get engaged? That's my question. Why don't our fellow senators, the people I know, why don't they do it? Because they're afraid that this guy, because he's already done it once, can keep them out of getting reelected. And if that's what's happened to them, they've fallen prey of things that they didn't set out to honor when they began their careers.
Something else that's been called a tax on the American people are tariffs, and that's been a signature of President Trump's trade policy. The U.S. announced a trade deal with the U.K. in May. They announced in June a handshake for a framework to implement an agreement that came about in May with China, but we're still waiting on dozens of trade deals with other countries, and the July 9th deadline for the reciprocal tariffs to go back into effect is looming. What do you make of the tariff negotiations, the tariff back and forth, and overall President Trump's trade policy?
Well, I think he fancies himself as quite a used car dealer, to be honest, in most instances. That his art of the deal, he thinks, is reverently endorsed and utilized by people all across the country. It's, frankly, that is a nonsensical way to try and do business with other countries or other corporations. At the end of the day, if you don't have some stability and some capacity to communicate, I was involved in the softwood lumber talks as a special representative when I was in Washington, and we negotiated a timber tariff policy because we needed the timber in America. They needed to sell their timber out of Canada, and finally came up with a process, long, lengthy, exhaustive discussion, offers back and forth, but efforts to try and understand the circumstances of each party because they were bound to represent their interests in a way that vindicated the interests of the people that they serve. So this bears no resemblance to that. This is some ridiculous belief evinced by the president that this kind of dealing back and forth, which you might expect on a car lot, is not going to work ultimately. And so I think that's the issue, is that it's going to end up being a disaster. And I hope it's not. I would love to see success for him, but it's so confusing and causing so much difficulty around the planet. We're going to find out, but my prediction is we're not going to be able to reach those agreements with China and some other countries because they're so oppressive from their point of view. And that's going to damage the American people.
I know you want some GOP lawmakers to find their way back home to the Republican Party you know and love, but I'm curious if there's any effort to reach out to some Democrats, because it really seems like since the 2024 election that Democrats are at a crossroads and there's a bit of an identity crisis within the party. There's a question of, do we go more towards the left? Do we go more towards the center? And I think that was encapsulated in a local race last night that made national headlines, and that's the New York City mayoral race, where a Democratic socialist was the underdog against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. The Democratic socialist, Zohran Mamdani, ended up coming out on top, and Cuomo conceded pretty quickly last night. Is there an effort from our Republican legacy to maybe reach out to more moderate, more centrist Democrats who are saying right now, I don't like where my party's headed. I think it's going too far left?
Well, you know this landscape as well as I do, I'm pretty certain. And at the end of the day, I always keep remembering what George Washington said on the last day he was in the White House after 2 terms. He was just incredibly saddened and issued a very strong warning about political parties and how they end up in the end serving themselves and serving the cabal that ends up ruling them, guiding them, making decisions about which candidates they support, how they allocate the funding, all of those things that go on inside of the political committee. And both political committees, in my judgment, have become circular and insular and focused only upon the dynamics and the imperatives of the people who are on the inside of the party. They're not focused upon the people of this country. So we are very much inclined to try and recapture that primary focus upon the people of America. And if that means Democrats come to our invitation, react to our invitation, if they want to be a part of something that we think has traditional values that reflect the things that we knew were true of our party back when we recognized it, great. We'll recruit anybody that is interested in making certain that we have a country that observes the respect for the rule of law, that they are concerned about fiscal responsibility, that they have confidence in the private sector, and are engaged in processes and policies that make sense for people to be working in this country. So yeah, we have no litmus test other than to join on those basic principles that we think are important for the country.
And I know you just joined the organization, or just had got appointed chair rather. What is next for our Republican legacy?
Well, we've been obviously we had the privilege of being with you this morning and having the chance to share, our thoughts and our appeal with the people that are loyal viewers of yours. We're working with individual states. I think we have 17 state chairs now that are interested in getting engaged. It's not that old. The grouping, the committee of all those of us who are inclined have not been at this for a great long period of time. Third-party conversions, trying to start a third party is incredibly difficult, and we've seen independent candidacies and third-party candidacies that have had a struggle going through this process. So what we're doing presently is advocating for a return to values that we think were a part of our Republican Party when we were actually operative members of it. Whoever wants to join us, and God in heaven, we hope there's a lot of people, because I think, frankly, about 65% of the people in this country, they can sense, they can feel it. Things are just not marching in the same direction as they were. There's no rhythm to life. There's no feeling of stability within our political system, and within world affairs. The world is in a place of great concern for the kinds of things that are happening around the planet. So we need to return to those values that allowed for us to get where we are to begin with, and those were the values of Lincoln in the beginning, and they're lasting and eternal. And anybody that wants to walk that path with us, we're delighted to share our time with.
Our Republican Legacy Chair, Marc Roscoe, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciated the conversation today, your perspective, and I hope you can come back and join me sometime soon. Thanks for coming on.
I'd be delighted. Thanks so much, Brittany. Take good care.